Boom. Welcome to History with Mr. Williams. Okay, welcome to lesson 17 of the American West. So this lesson is where we look at the conflicts finally arriving. They've been teased in the background quite a lot here, but this is where ultimately those who either agreed to prior agreements with the American government or those who disagreed with them are now going to come to fruition in the form of conflicts. And the first one we're going to be looking at is something called Little Crow's War at 1862. Now this was named after the chief who led the conflict for the Plains Indians, Little Crow. Now he was the chief of the Dakota Sioux. Now simply put, under the Fort Laramie Treaty, or the first Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, they were promised yearly payment in return for them moving to reservations. However, ultimately, they had half of their land taken away from them after this agreement, and this therefore led to Little Crow being quite angry, and understandably, because they were promised us, well, in fact, the quote here: "You promised us that we should have this land forever, but now you take half it away." The American government said they were justified because the Native Americans hadn't managed to keep to some parts of their bargain, but obviously this was not the side or viewpoint that the Native Americans took. So therefore, the American government, in failing to provide or look after the Native Americans, not only took away their land, but they also failed to even give them the food that they were promised. So therefore the Sioux, well, if they haven't got the food, well, they don't know how to farm, and also the land they were given was reduced and not very good quality anyway, so they obviously ended up having issues. And the reservation agents, they again even charged more money for food, so it created a bit of uproar within the Native Americans or the Dakota Sioux, because simply they weren't getting the agreement or the part of the agreement that they thought they had under Fort Laramie. So basically what happened is the Native Americans, they saw that there was a full storehouse of food that obviously the American government weren't giving them, so they raided those storehouses trying to get some food and get what they thought they would deserved, and with that did include killing and attacking 600 settlers and US soldiers to obviously be able to get into the storehouses and make sure that they got them. However, whilst there was some success in the short term for the Native Americans, ultimately it did lead to some payback, because the white settlers wanted revenge, and that they got. 400 Indian Americans were arrested, but also 38 men executed, and that was used to show strength to the Native Americans and to deter them. But actually the main impact was that the Dakota Sioux were moved onto a reservation that was even worse, and ultimately many of them starved in the winter of 1862. So that was basically the lesson of: you must do what the American government tell you to do, and even if the American government break their side of the treaty, it doesn't matter, because you will get attacked if you try and speak out against them. So that was the first conflict of the 1860s. We're now going to look at the second conflict, which was the Sand Creek Massacre. Now this is in its name, however the chief was not actually called Sand Creek. The chief was Black Kettle of the Cheyenne. Now under the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty here, you might notice a pattern here. They were protected something, and as always, the American government are about to break their promise. They were promised land that was protected and sacred to them. However, ultimately, gold was discovered in that territory in 1858. So that therefore meant settlers began crossing their lands. They weren't necessarily laying claim to the land, they were just simply crossing the land, and more impacting the Native Americans because it scared away the buffalo. The Native Americans therefore said, right, we need to sort this out. So in the Treaty of Fort Wise, Black Kettle agreed to move his reservation with the promise of protection. So he thought, well, if they're not going to stick to the Fort Laramie Treaty, at least they might stick to it in Fort Wise. However, again, due to the way that the Native American society was set up, Little Crow did not have control over some of his warrior brotherhoods within his tribe. Now these were known as the Dog Soldiers, and simply what happened is that they went, because they were starving, because they were angry, they thought, right, we're going to attack the trains and steal food from the settlers. They thought they were justified because they weren't getting what they were told they'll get under Fort Laramie. They didn't actually harm the settlers per se, they just attacked them to steal their goods. So Black Kettle set up his camp at Sands Creek, where he thought, right, I'm sticking to my part of the agreement. I'm sticking to the Treaty of Fort Wise. I will be safe here. However, it didn't go down well with the American government. So the American local governor, he set out a man called Colonel Chivington with 700 cavalry, and he sent them out to get revenge. So they attacked Black Kettle's tribe at Sand Creek, and that was even when Black Kettle was not preparing for war. He had white flags to show he was being peaceful, and he was sticking to the the Treaty of Fort Wise, I should say. Again, 130 Indian men, women, and children were massacred, and they were scalped as well. So I'm talking about the Americans scalping the Native Americans here, not the other way, as movies might have you believe happened all the time. So therefore, that led to basically a big massacre of the Cheyenne tribe led by Black Kettle. Now, Black Kettle was able to survive, but he simply spread the message around, and he told everyone about the actions of the US Army and how simply they should not be trusted. They've broken the Fort Laramie Treaty. They've broken the Permanent Indian Frontier. They've broken the Treaty of Fort Wise. Therefore, guys, stand up. Don't just lie down and do what they ask. So therefore, the American government, again, right, we need to punish you even further. We're going to put you on land half the size, which meant obviously the Native Americans couldn't hunt their buffalo. And also, oh, don't worry, we will promise you some compensation. As you might expect, the promise was never kept. Now this leads us to our third battle or conflict, and this one is where the lessons were arguably learned from the prior two. Now this is Red Cloud's War. Now this was the same year as President Grant's peace policy from lesson number 16. Now this is where a man called Red Cloud entered the Lakota Sioux. Now he will actually be teaming up some other people later in our story, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, and those are the three main guys in our story. But basically, again, key pattern, under the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, they were promised land. Obviously, that land was not going to be protected because something called the Bozeman Trail was set up through that. Now, if you go back to lesson 15, as a result of gold mining and the discovery of gold near the Dakota Sioux tribe, the miners basically took a shortcut across the reservation land, and this crossed through the Sioux land. So this therefore led to the Native Americans saying, right, we need to end this trail, you cannot come across our land. However, the US government said, no, we're going to allow them, if they want, we're going to make sure that the settlers are protected, but admittedly, we'll protect you, don't you worry, Dakota Sioux. But the reality is that that wasn't necessarily going to be stuck by. Because Red Cloud has already been warned by Little Crow due to the War of 1862, remember, to not trust the US government. So therefore, he said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to get there first. So Red Cloud set up and decided to work with Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, so tribes from across the Sioux Nation. Remember, the Lakota Sioux is just one tribe within the whole nation. They decided to team up, and they said, right, we're going to attack individuals, people who are using this trail, and also included the army forts that were actually built upon the trail, despite the fact the US government have just promised not to build there. So what happened is something called a Fetterman's Trap. Apologies. Now this is where 3,000 Plains Indians, they basically hid out of sight, and they sent two riders or two scouts to go and attract the attention of a nearby army unit. Now, of that army unit, Captain William Fetterman, now he led 80 US troops. They were cavalry troops, so he thought, right, we're going to be able to ride quickly and get those two scouts. But as they went over the hill, they were sighted by the 3,000 Plains Indians who were there lying to trap them. That therefore led to Captain Fetterman and all of his 80 men. There were no survivors. They were killed. Now, this was a big embarrassment and a shame for the American government, and a big victory for the Native Americans, and showed that actually if they did stand up for themselves, they could fight against the American government. So this led to something called the Second Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. Now this was where the government realised, right, we need to do something. So they agreed to close the Bozeman Trail, and actually they agreed to basically not attack Red Cloud and his followers, and they promised them that, right, you guys can go to a reservation and it's going to be for Sioux tribes only. Red Cloud did agree to that. However, in our story moving forward, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, the two guys mentioned before, well, they're not necessarily going to follow that, because later on we will see what happens to the Native Americans who decided to follow the Second Fulton Army, and more importantly to those who decided to stand up against the American government, because as you can guess, the American government will break their treaties again. So that is History of Mr. Williams. Thank you.